Mr. Speaker, the workforce of the 21st century is a lot different from the workforce of the 30s and 40s when many of our nation's labor laws were first written. As such, many of these laws are outdated and out of touch with realities facing today's workers. For example, in nearly half of two-parent households, both mom and dad work full-time. That's up from roughly 30% in 1970. Meanwhile, millennials now represent the majority of the workforce. Given the changes in the workforce, there are new challenges related to the work-family balance, from children's field trips to taking care of an elderly family member to a single parent juggling different tasks while their spouse is on a military deployment. The demands are greater than ever. That is where the Working Families Flexibility Act comes in. This common-sense bill would improve the quality of life for many hardworking men and women by removing outdated federal restrictions imposed solely on the private sector. Already, workers in the public sector at both the federal, state, and at the local level have the ability to take comp time in lieu of overtime pay if they prefer. This bill would give that same option to workers in the private sector. Here's how it would work. An employee and their employer would come together and mutually agree to enter an arrangement where the employee would receive time and a half in time off or comp time instead of time and a half overtime pay. In other words, employees would have the choice between paid time off and cash wages for working overtime. As I mentioned, this provision is already available for workers in the public sector. That's because in 1985, Congress amended the Fair Labor Standards Act to give public sector employees greater flexibility. In fact, in a report filed by the House Education and the Workforce Committee more than 30 years ago, our Democrat colleagues wrote that this change in the law recognized the, quote, mutual benefits, close quote, of comp time for state and local governments and outlined the freedom and flexibility comp time would offer public sector workers. So shouldn't workers in the private sector be entitled to the same freedom and flexibility given to government workers? Now, I know some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will say this bill is somehow bad for workers. That could not be further from the truth. Let me clear up some of the false information put out by union bosses and special interest groups. First, this proposal is completely voluntary. Both an employee and an employer would have to agree to a comp time agreement, and their agreement would have to be put in writing. Second, no employer can coerce or intimidate their employee in comp time. An employee who feels they've been mistreated can file a charge with the Department of Labor at no cost, or they can bring their own legal action. Employers who take advantage of their employees would face the same penalties as they would for other wage violations. Now, as a labor and employment attorney, I've been a part of these kind of legal matters in the past, and I can honestly say that no sensible employer would take advantage of an employee and risk double damages, exorbitant attorney's fees, and a legal battle with the federal government. Third, employees have control over when to use their comp time as long as reasonable notice is given and the request doesn't unduly disrupt the workplace. This is the same standard used in the public sector, and it is the same standard used under the Family and Medical Leave Act. I imagine it's also the same standard used in each of our congressional offices. Fourth, this bill includes a 5-year sunset that would require Congress to come back and reaffirm this law after reviewing the impact of comp time. This would give us the ability to change the law based on the real-world impact. Fifth, the bill would set the maximum comp time accrual amount at 160 hours, which is less than what's allowed in the public sector. This provision was actually included after Democrats expressed concerns that workers would accrue too much comp time. Sixth, an employee has the right to cash out their comp time at any time and for any reason. This is a decision that the employee alone can make. Additionally, at the end of a year, employees will receive a cash payment for any unused hours. Finally, this is not a far-fetched or radical idea. In fact, President Bill Clinton had his own comp time proposal during his presidency. It's great for workers and actually gives them greater choice and flexibility in the workplace. In fact, our committee, the Committee on Education and the Workforce, heard a real-life example of how comp time would make life easier for families during a recent hearing on the bill. We heard about a clerical worker for a mental health company who recently found out she was pregnant and was also putting in a lot of overtime during a transition to a new computer system. This mom-to-be simply wanted to waive the overtime pay and instead be credited the time for maternity leave. As our human resources professional testified, quote, "I had to explain to her that we were unable to do so because it was against the law. It was difficult conveying this message to this single mom-to-be who felt she should be allowed the option to choose for herself whether to take the overtime pay or paid leave when her child was born," close quote. That is why this bill is necessary, for people like this working mom. That is how this bill will make a real difference. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know comp time won't work for every worker or family. So if an employee wants to continue receiving time and a half overtime pay, then they can continue to do so, and this bill will have no impact on that. But this bill would create a new option for employees to better meet the needs of the 21st century workforce. Workers today want and need the type of freedom and flexibility this bill provides. This bill would allow a working mom or dad to put in a little extra time at work in order to have that time off, to attend a child's baseball game, dance recital, or field trip. This is all about freedom, flexibility, fairness, and choice. Certainly, more work and changes will be needed as we adapt to the workforce of the 21st century. And I look forward to learning more about my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But the simple fact that there are other proposals out there should not stop us from passing this common-sense bill to give working families the flexibility they need and deserve. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support House Resolution 299 and the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.